Give two people the exact same amount of money, the same starting point, the same opportunities, and within a few years, one of them will be building something and the other will be back exactly where they started. Not because of luck, not because of intelligence, something else decides the outcome. Something that has almost nothing to do with the number on the paycheck. Lottery winners lose fortunes in a matter of years. Athletes with career earnings most people will never see in a lifetime file for bankruptcy before their bodies even finish aging out of the sport. Meanwhile, people who started with almost nothing, immigrants with no financial head start, factory workers, single parents working 2 jobs, quietly build steady, lasting wealth over decades. Income explains far less than people assume. What actually determines whether someone stays broke is buried much deeper, in patterns of thought so automatic they rarely get examined. This is not a story about bad decisions. It is a story about the invisible architecture behind those decisions and why so many capable people keep arriving at the same financial dead end, no matter how many times life hands them a fresh start. Long before anyone earns their first paycheck, a set of beliefs about money has already been quietly installed. Children do not learn about money through lectures. They learn through atmosphere, through the tension in a parent's voice when a bill arrives, through overheard arguments about rent, through the specific way a household treats scarcity or abundance as the normal state of existence. A child raised watching adults panic every time money got tight absorbs a lesson no textbook ever teaches. Money is dangerous, unpredictable, something to be feared rather than managed. That lesson does not stay in childhood. It rides along into adulthood, disguised as instinct, shaping decisions that feel personal and deliberate, but are actually inherited reflexes running in the background. Psychologists sometimes call these inherited beliefs money scripts, unconscious rules absorbed so early that most adults never think to question them, the same way nobody questions why they flinch at a loud noise. A person can read every finance book available and still sabotage their own progress because the belief operating underneath their decisions was never installed by logic in the first place, and logic alone rarely uninstalls it.
Scarcity does something to the mind that has nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with bandwidth. When a person is constantly worried about whether there will be enough money to cover the next bill, a significant portion of their mental capacity gets consumed by that worry, leaving less available for planning, patience, and long-term thinking. This is not weakness, it is a documented cognitive effect, sometimes described as tunneling, where urgent scarcity narrows attention so tightly onto the immediate problem that everything outside that tunnel becomes harder to see, including opportunities that could actually solve the underlying issue. A person operating under constant financial pressure is not simply poor in money, they are functioning with less available mental space, making decisions from a narrowed, exhausted version of themselves, rather than a clear one. This explains a pattern that looks irrational from the outside, but makes perfect sense from within the tunnel. People under financial stress often make choices that provide short-term relief but long-term harm, not because they lack discipline, but because the part of the brain responsible for weighing long-term consequences is running on fumes, starved of the bandwidth it needs to function properly. Here is where the pattern becomes genuinely strange. Some people who escape scarcity temporarily, through a bonus, an inheritance, a lucky break, find themselves back in financial trouble within a surprisingly short window, almost as if some internal mechanism pulled them back toward the familiar. This happens because identity is far stickier than circumstance. A person who has spent decades seeing themselves as someone who struggles with money, someone who is simply not good with finances, someone who never gets ahead, carries that identity into every new opportunity. When their financial reality briefly contradicts that identity, an uncomfortable tension appears.
the kind of psychological friction people unconsciously resolve by returning to whatever feels familiar, even if familiar means struggling. This is not conscious self-sabotage in the dramatic sense people imagine. It rarely looks like deliberately burning money. It looks like a string of reasonable-seeming decisions: a new car, a generous loan to a relative, an unnecessary upgrade, that collectively steer a person right back toward the financial identity they have always known. The mind, it turns out, often prefers a familiar struggle over an unfamiliar success, because the unfamiliar success has no established internal script to make sense of it.
There is a name for what happens after enough failed attempts to change a financial situation: learned helplessness. The concept originally came from psychological research showing that repeated exposure to uncontrollable negative outcomes eventually teaches a mind to stop trying, even once circumstances change and effort would actually work. Applied to money, this looks like a person who tried to save once, got hit with an emergency that wiped it out, tried again, got laid off, tried a third time, and eventually stopped trying altogether. Not because they're lazy, but because their own history has quietly taught them that effort does not change the outcome. This is one of the most tragic patterns in financial psychology, because it is entirely rational given the data that person's life has provided them, and entirely wrong about what would happen if they tried again under different conditions or with a different strategy. The danger of learned helplessness is that it disguises itself as realism. It feels like wisdom, like finally accepting the truth about how things are, when it is actually the residue of past pain being mistaken for present certainty. Even when belief and circumstance align in someone's favor, a separate older force works against long-term financial progress: the brain's preference for reward that arrives now over reward that arrives later. This bias is ancient, older than currency itself, built for a world where immediate resources genuinely mattered more than abstract future ones. A meal today mattered more to early humans than a hypothetical meal next season. That wiring never fully updated for a world of retirement accounts and compound interest, concepts that require imagining a version of the future vividly enough to sacrifice for it today. People who stay broke are rarely people who cannot do math. They are people whose mental image of their future self is faint, abstract, almost like a stranger, while their present self is vivid, urgent, and impossible to ignore. Every dollar spent today feels real. Every dollar saved for a future that feels foggy and uncertain feels almost imaginary by comparison. This is why financial advice built purely on logic so often fails to change behavior. The problem was never a lack of information. It is a battle between a vivid present and a blurry future, and the present almost always wins unless something is done to make the future feel real. Alongside these internal patterns sits a specific way of explaining life's outcomes that quietly locks people into their situation, attributing financial results entirely to outside forces: the economy, the boss, the government, bad timing, other people's greed. All of these external explanations may contain real truth, and often do, but when they become the exclusive lens through which someone views their entire financial life, something dangerous happens. Responsibility, and with it, agency, gets handed away. A person who believes their financial situation is entirely the result of forces outside their control has no reason to examine their own decisions, because in their mental model, their decisions were never the deciding factor to begin with. This is different from acknowledging real unfairness, which absolutely exists in economic life. It is the difference between someone who says, "The system made this harder for me," and works twice as intelligently within it, and someone who says, "The system decided this for me, so nothing I do will matter." The first stance preserves power, the second one quietly surrenders it. And once agency is surrendered,
Even good opportunities tend to slip past unnoticed because a person who does not believe their actions matter stops paying close attention to the moments when they actually would. There is a quieter, more private pattern that rarely gets discussed because it does not look like a decision at all. It looks like avoidance. Many people who stay financially stuck simply do not look. They do not check their account balances regularly. They do not open certain envelopes. They avoid calculating exactly what they owe because the discomfort of not knowing feels more tolerable than the discomfort of knowing for certain. This avoidance is not laziness. It is often shame in disguise, a protective instinct against confronting evidence that might confirm a painful belief about themselves. But avoidance guarantees the exact outcome it is trying to escape. Money problems left unexamined do not pause while ignored. They compound quietly, the same way an untreated illness worsens whether or not the patient wants to look at the test results. The financially stuck are rarely people who lack the intelligence to solve their problems. They are often people who have never let themselves see the full shape of the problem clearly enough to begin solving it, because looking directly at it feels like confirming a fear they have carried for years. Zoom out far enough, and an entirely different force comes into view, one operating not inside a single mind, but across an entire social environment. Human beings calibrate their sense of normal against the people immediately around them, not against the world at large. A person surrounded by others who treat debt as ordinary, who view saving as unnecessary caution, who spend confidently without much thought for tomorrow, will absorb that atmosphere as the baseline for what normal financial behavior looks like, regardless of what the math actually says. This works in the opposite direction just as powerfully. Communities and families where saving, investing, and long-term thinking are simply how things are tend to produce individuals who do those same things almost without deciding to, the same way a fish never notices the water. Breaking financial patterns is genuinely harder for someone whose entire social circle operates on the opposite set of assumptions, not because they lack willpower, but because moving away from those norms can feel like moving away from belonging itself. And belonging is one of the deepest human needs there is, older and more powerful than any financial goal. Underneath nearly all of these patterns sits something even more fundamental, the quiet, often unconscious link between self-worth and net worth. For some people, financial struggle has become so tied to their sense of identity that actual financial success would feel on some buried level like becoming a different person, someone unrecognizable to themselves and to the people who have always known them a certain way. Psychologists describe a pull towards self-verification, a tendency for people to unconsciously seek outcomes that match their existing self-image, even when that image is negative, because confirmation feels more comfortable than contradiction, however painful the confirmation might be. A person who has always seen themselves as bad with money might find genuine financial success strangely uncomfortable, disorienting, even guilt-inducing, and without realizing it, they behave in ways that pull them back toward the identity they already recognize. This is among the most difficult patterns to interrupt because it does not feel like sabotage from the inside. It feels like simply being oneself, and nobody consciously fights against being themselves.
Interrupting any of this rarely begins with a spreadsheet. It begins with rewriting the internal story a person tells about who they are in relation to money. This is slower and less satisfying than a budgeting app, but it is the only intervention that actually reaches the root instead of trimming the branches. Practical steps matter enormously, and no amount of insight replaces the discipline of tracking spending, automating savings, and building an emergency fund. But those steps only stick permanently once they are attached to a new identity. Not someone forcing themselves to save despite who they are, but someone who has quietly become a person who saves, the same way a runner eventually stops forcing themselves out the door and simply becomes someone who runs. The moment a financial habit becomes part of identity rather than a rule imposed against resistance, it stops requiring willpower altogether, because willpower is expensive and identity is free. This is why the people who successfully break generational patterns of financial struggle almost always describe the shift not as a change in behavior, but as a change in how they see themselves, with the new behavior simply following along afterward almost effortlessly as evidence of who they had already decided to become. Being broke was never truly about the number in an account. It has always been closer to a set of inherited beliefs, narrowed attention, familiar identity, and quiet avoidance, all working together beneath the surface of decisions that look from the outside like simple choices. None of this is destiny. Every pattern described here was learned, absorbed, reinforced through repetition, which means every one of them can also be unlearned, though rarely quickly and never without discomfort. The people who eventually escape financial struggle are not the ones who found some clever trick the rest of the world missed. They are the ones who got honest enough to look directly at the story they had been telling themselves about money, and brave enough to start writing a different one decision at a time, long before the bank account had any evidence to offer them in return.